Recording has started. My name is Chris Marquardt. You're watching Pick One Photo, which is the show where I invite a guest. The guest chooses one of their own photos, and the guest picks one of my photos, and then we talk about those two pictures. With me today, good morning, Jeremiah Chechik. Hey, how are you doing?
Hi, Chris. How are you? From sunny, actually, it's a little foggy California today. As it's warming, we have a little fog in the air, but greetings.
So, Jeremiah, you were a Hollywood director, but you come from photography. You've been doing a whole lot of different, photographic things. You pretty much endeavored into lots of things, including holography and whatnot. Do you want to tell us a few words about yourself?
Yeah, I come from my father was a photographer, a little portrait photographer for a while when I was young. And inherited some of his cameras, a Rolleiflex 2.25, my first camera, and which I still have and still functions beautifully. And maybe that kind of skewed me to a little more formal composition anyway. But so I began in that kind of interest very early, though. When I went to university, I was an art major. I did study directing, theater, and that kind of led me to create and work with a lot of kind of outside artists and develop kind of a love for both photography and theater, which unified in my interest in film. I was lucky enough to, through all kinds of machinations and good fortune, to begin a commercial photographic career for a while, just because there were some executives at McCann Erickson who saw my work in a gallery and hired me to shoot some pictures that kind of emulated the style that I was working in. And through that, they started to give me more work, and my work led me to fashion. And then I went to Milan to do some work. And after a few months, I stayed, began working for Vogue, returned to New York, and there began a career in commercial direction, which led me to feature film and eventually to television. All along the way, I never really stopped taking pictures and experimenting. And in that world, I explored making your own emulsions and printing on stone with lithography, etching plates, holography.
Is there anything you haven't done?
Oh, so much, and I fear I'm running out of time. So,
it's one of these things with photography that I find fascinating. That whenever I think, oh, now I've got it, now I've sorted it, I figured it out, I just open this tiny little door somewhere, and it's an entire new building right behind that.
I feel the same way, and I think what we share in common, that we are both inspired by the real world, and where it be the kind of forces of nature and light at play, or people in their kind of day-to-day life, or even dramatic presentations of that life. And yet we're also fascinated by the technical, the science of it. And
True,
both of these things are very inspiring to us. A new technique, or a new camera, a new glass, or the fusion of both within the interests in the world. I think that creates kind of energy for us to kind of continually explore the photographic process. And lately, over the last few years, I've started exhibiting again, and I'm working on several books with some art publishers here in the US and internationally. But it's all about false realities and recreating realities. Initially, it started by doing in-game photography and creating a kind of neo-real approach to that, and working on a kind of a false history of mankind through the eyes of gaming design, and so working my way through that. But that led me to kind of experimenting in learning Unreal Engine and Blender Unity,
Which
and
is,
creating my own.
I mean, Unreal Engine, especially now when we look at where filmmaking is going, where movie productions are going, Unreal Engine is kind of almost at the center of a lot of these new efforts with virtual sets and this kind of stuff. I think we could probably talk about that for like half an hour
Yeah,
in itself.
right.
So,
but that's me, and basically,
wonderful.
So one of the reasons I chose this particular photograph is that it is very different than what I've been working on lately, but does represent kind of a need, an addiction, and I think I share that with you, of a worldview of embracing people in the world, people who generally are invisible to us, but those are the people that I feel so incredibly comfortable with, and the resonance of travel and meeting people who often ask you, why are you here? This isn't a tourist place. And
Yes.
I go, I'm curious. And when you just say you're curious, they embrace you because you give them significance.
All right.
In your interest.
Before we continue, let's first have a look at the two photos. The one that you chose of mine, which one is that? Which number do you remember?
God, I think it's 45. It's the tree.
It's the tree. Oh, yeah, there we go. The sunset shot. Hold on. I should probably bring this up on the screen. Okie dokie. So that one we'll keep for the end of this episode, but let's have a look at your photo first. And it is in, well, okay, so I did some Googling. I, of course, went by the title because you are one of the few people on this series so far who titles their photos. Which again, I'm almost a stickler for titles. I like titles. I think a work of a photograph deserves a title. It's kind of almost a sign of respect when I look at that. But then I always go for very descriptive titles, and I think yours is also very descriptive because it's Xinjiang. It's a Chinese town.
Province.
No, it's a province. Okay, the Xinjiang province in China. So that's the title of this photo, and it looks very much like the general area. I haven't been to that specific part, but I've been to Kyrgyzstan, which is not too far from there.
You can see Kyrgyzstan from the picture. It's right across that water.
So the landscape rings very, very familiar to me. I have a Kyrgyz hat here, so that's one I brought back from Kyrgyzstan. So again, same hat that this guy is wearing, which is a very normal, traditional, everyday hat. Looks like a celebratory kind of thing, but it is pretty much an everyday hat they're wearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The landscape, as I said, the fact that they have an open air pool table is, yeah, I love it because that's a thing in Asia or in some parts of Asia. Then sometimes they have big, like, corrugated steel lids that they put on top of it, so when it rains it doesn't get wet, and when the sun is back out they open it up and they play open air pool, which I find fascinating.
Well, I wondered what struck me when I first encountered it, and
that would be my first question after the title, because again I'm a bit of a stickler for that, but what made you press the button? What was it at that moment, or is it a more general thing?
No. I had traveled across Mongolia with a very dear friend of mine, who's an excellent cinematographer, Christopher Doyle, who lives in China, and we had traveled through and into Xinjiang province, not an easy place to travel, and I'm not even sure it's possible to travel there anymore. There's yet another border within China to actually go in. And I remember us talking our way through into this area and down past Urumqi and Kashgar, which is literally a 13th century city looking very much like Kabul. If you've ever been to Kabul, it's very similar to that city. And in that city, which is predominantly kind of Asian, a lot of kind of mixing from the steps of the stands. The culture is quite unique and interesting, and there's virtually no tourists there at all. So there's an extremely interested population in what you're doing. Sometimes a little too interested, but you encounter these Han Chinese soldiers who are looking after them, and unlike Beijing, where you see them all like crisp, beautiful uniform, when you get to Xinjiang, they send all their, I guess, the troops that didn't exactly adhere to the visual or behavioral stance, and they're all, running side scams and all the rest of it. But pressing on from Kashgar, we moved up into the mountains through towards K2 and all of the that particular area, which is crisp, as you know, in terms of clarity. There's no pollution. It's like putting on sharp lenses over your eyes. It's quite amazing.
A bit like what we're experiencing right now. This is the end of April 2020 when we're recording this. There's a lot of clarity in the air right now.
There is. So as we moved towards and into and up the mountains, up to about 12,000 feet, we encountered this community. And this is right at the very, very edge of China, right at the very western edge of China. And the people were so embracing of us and invited us into this community. I dare say it wasn't even a village. It was just a loose connection of people kind of struggling to make a living with their goat and their horse and whatever planting they can achieve. But as we kind of spent the day in this community, the people were so embracing, so they were just so warm and whatnot. And so they just allowed us to feel very connected. And soon we were able, in a way, to disappear with no posing or anything. And
how long did that take until you felt like you weren't there anymore, or they didn't notice you anymore?
Maybe a couple of hours.
Okay.
The first hour spent in kind of this communication, because they're not native Chinese speakers, and so there's a lot of sign language involved.
And then they get bored of you, right?
They get bored of you, and they'd rather go play pool. And when I saw this pool table, the first thing that struck me, even before, when I watched them kind of circle the pool table and play, I wanted to understand, well, what was the story of how they got this pool table to this place? Where did that pool table originate? And how did it move up and into the mountains? And while I was thinking of it, these two men started to focus at the end of their game. And I was so struck by the attention, the composition in terms of the lines, how the mountains in the background all moved to focus their attention on the remaining balls on the table. And there was a sense of mirroring that attention for me, the photographer. Also working in color, which is something I don't often do, though I've started to kind of revisit some of my color work as I posted on Instagram lately. That the green and the overall tonality was very unified, and again, it drove me to think, oh well, that's a perfect picture. And as soon as I saw the pool cue raise, I knew that was it. I clicked it instinctively, and even though I didn't look at it for probably I think a few days until I really got a sense of kind of studying it, that I just knew in my heart that that was a special photograph. And so there you go.
I like the reduction. So it does have a certain, let's say, black and white quality to it, as it's quite reduced in color palette, which I love about photos, which I strive towards when I take photos, most of the time subconsciously, but then it turns out that's the reduction in color is a thing that I just do. And you have those stripes. You have the blue stripe of the sky, then you have the greenish stripe of the mountains, and you have another bluish turquoise kind of stripe of the water, and another earthy greenish stripe, and the pool table is a kind of this. Well, it's not an odd one out. It fits in the color scheme, but it is very different. As in, it's more a primary color than the other things, I guess. So it's almost like there's a gradient from blue to green going through the entire picture with some interruptions in it.
The picture looks very saturated, and
it has a film-like quality to it.
Yes, it was done on a small Lumix, but it was I never played with it significantly in terms of post-processing. From though when the sun is that clear and the exposure is that right, that the natural saturation of the color just pops. And so I didn't want to, quote, improve on reality in that way.
It's also interesting, the silhouette nature of the people, where you don't really see the faces that clearly, if at all, was just slightly. So for me, I wonder how other people might see this picture, because I know this is a Kyrgyz hat. So I know this is probably from the general area of Kyrgyzstan. So it's probably somewhere in Central Asia. The pool table being outside in the open under the sun is an Asian thing, as far as I've seen. So I can instinctively place it somewhere in the world, whereas I'm not sure at all if others who look at that picture, how they would experience it. And you and I, we both have the, I'd say the burden of not being able to see this with fresh eyes, right?
I would say that if you haven't traveled in that area and are not familiar with that culture and the wardrobe and the giveaways, it feels very surrealistic. It feels very unusual. Mm-hmm. It feels very anachronistic, very mysterious in many ways, almost staged in so many ways.
Like everything is kind of outside of our Western experience.
Yes, and again, that drives me to press the shutter, because I take the picture recognizing how much I am an outsider and just appreciating what I do not know, what is not familiar to me, interests me. And so I embrace that image, those people, and the silhouette of them, because I could have exposed it a little more, gives those men more of a universality.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does.
And I think that is... I think that's special because they represent all of humanity when you don't identify them as that specific. Maybe I'm being over intellectual about it, but in that way, I do feel that by creating a little bit of mystery, we engage the audience in focusing on, in a way, on the table and on the moment. And share that with the two men playing.
Yeah, very true. Okay, thanks for sharing. Let's move on to the
important picture.
The one, yeah, exactly. No. Every picture has the same importance. So the tree. What do you want to know about it?
Well,
should I set the scene?
Well, it looks like it was taken in California, in the Central Valley of California. That's what it looks like. And I have the advantage of knowing maybe a little bit more than I should, because I know it is not taken there.
No.
And part of the reason I live in California, so I'm sensitive to that golden light, a single tree, the fact that it is not a forest, it's more of a meadow. And I'm struck also by the form and the kind of stillness of it. I love those moments of kind of, I feel when I look at this picture, I feel that I'm taking a very, very deep breath in and just appreciating the moment of being alive in this world.
Okay, so let's lift the curtain. It's not taken in California. Yeah. It's nowhere near California. This is in Ireland, in the Wicklow Mountains, which is a place that Monica and I visited years ago. We did a several-week tour all across Ireland, different places.
County Wicklow, right? County Wicklow.
Yes, yeah. And this is on the way from the place we stayed down to a little lake. So on the left side, there is a lake. There's some horses on a meadow, I think right behind us, or it might be sheep and horses everywhere. And this was in the evening, and we were on our way back from the lake, just having hung out there a little bit, and we walked up the hill, and I saw the sun setting, and the light is just beautiful around that time of day. And the mixture of, the clouds, the light, I just had this impulse. I want to take a picture. I want to kind of take an interesting sunset type picture. And
what makes the picture more than just an interesting sunset picture, more than just a, quote, tourist picture, is your use of selective focus by what appears to be a swing tilt lens, which really directs not only the focus onto the tree, but adds a kind of dreamlike quality, and together with the kind of triangulation of the forms coming in from both sides, focuses the attention on the tree and the light. So it just pulls us in. It's almost impossible to focus away from that. It's very demanding of our attention. And in that way, that was why I picked it, because of the similarity of the experience of a picture that focuses the viewer's attention on an element within the photograph that kind of creates a relationship with that image. And I feel that's important.
And in that respect, it is a very formally contrived picture. I mean, I know people want to look at light, so light is the central part of the picture. The center of the frame usually gets a bit more attention than the rest of it. The people like to look at where things are in focus, and so I did have the tilt shift lens, a Canon tilt shift lens, the 24mm on, as I often do, and it was just an impulse at that moment to bring all these things together and do a sideways tilt, so the left and right would be out of focus, and I could just really focus the attention to the middle. And then this was not a conscious thought process. This was more like stuff I had done many times before, just thrown together these same old ideas into something that I hadn't done before in the combination of them. And the starburst being like the small aperture, so the sun gets these little spikes moving left and right to figure out the exact figure out the exact space and point where I need to be to get this starburst, figuring out the exposure so I get some detail in the clouds. But that was all partially on purpose and partially just a lucky accident, because I don't think I changed the exposure that much at that point.
Isn't that really the nature of our experience as photographers in the world? There is that moment of being in the right place or the wrong place at the right time, or vice versa, and using your instinct to just move the camera to capture it. And sometimes it's so quick you don't even see it until later, and often you construct it on the very moment that you approach your subject. But there is so much of luck involved with with the experience that creates the moment.
I wish I could claim that this was all intuition, but I didn't have that feeling at the moment when I took the picture that, oh, I nailed this. It was more, let me take that. Okay, let me make one or two decisions to kind of do something with it. And then only when I looked at it on the bigger screen back home, I was like, okay, I kind of like what came out there. So if I wish I was able to, I wish I knew what makes a good picture so I could repeat it all the time, but that's not the case. It takes a bit of serendipity.
There would be no excitement in doing it.
Exactly.
If you could, when directing a scene or preparing a film or a show, I have to think if you prepare storyboarding and casting right, the script is good, and you lock down every cut, every shot, and every performance attitude in your head, and then go on to the set with that and only that as your kind of intention, that often the piece will be stillborn, because you don't allow the serendipity of the moment, the accident. I'm not arguing against preparing. Preparing is very, very important. But within the preparation, allowing the preparation to go out the window and capitalize on something new, or just adjusting it based on the reality of that moment, leads to something greater than the prep and the sum of the parts.
So when you go and you shoot a movie, you leave some leeway there for the actors, for everyone on set? For
everything, for the way the light may hit a certain object in a scene, the way an actor reacts to another one, how I intended to shoot it maybe in multiple cuts, and yet if the scene plays in a single long take, I'll go with it. So I'm very much about the instinctive balance of the serendipity, the magic, the kind of the something you can't even experience in your head, something just new, and prepping it so that if you find yourself just completely unconscious of on the day, you just follow your menu and you'll get through it. So both are there. It's the same thing when I was a commercial photographer, is allowing myself to know, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this when I get to the studio or the set. And yet if something exciting happens, I'm all over it. And that often could be a lot better and often not. I mean, you don't know, but allowing the openness of the world to infect and invade your creative process is very important.
Learn to see the opportunities and then seize them, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Jeremiah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Very welcome.
If people want to find out a bit more about you, where would they go?
Well, my website, www.chechik.com, CHECHIK.com. That has a variety of my work there in my galleries. On Instagram, which is a lot more serendipitous, it's Jeremiah_Chechik. And occasionally I'll kind of tweet out something irrelevant, and that is at Tin Roof, I think.
All right. Thanks for coming, and hope to have you back one day. Bye-bye.
Speak to you soon. Bye.